So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was Afghanistan. Now, as far as Joe Biden's concerned with Afghanistan, I feel like I feel like a lot of people are just like blindly believing him, or they're taking him at his word. Kennedy, what are your thoughts on that first?
I think there has been this tendency for the last 20 years to sort of buy whatever story is being spun about Afghanistan by our government and to just ignore anything about the history of Afghanistan, the people there, and what has actually been going on. And I think that most people that I talk to that are like more traditionally liberal or traditionally conservative about Afghanistan have bought into a fantasy of what it's like there, period. And that
Yeah.
that continues with this rhetoric.
They want to ignore 20 years of American war crimes in Afghanistan and pretend that 20 years of Americans committing the sort of human rights violations they're saying the Taliban are going to commit now didn't happen. And that's just false.
Hmm. So, um, as far as from what I've been looking at, um, actually, you know what, Nancy? Oh wait, yeah, Nancy said Afghanistan or any other war, just follow the money. Absolutely.
Yep.
Um, so, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, I feel like it's kind of like a mainstream media CIA talking point to say, you know what? I think Biden really means it when he says he's pulling out. Now, yeah, some people are saying, well, they're being, pushed out, by the Taliban. They're not necessarily going willingly. Um, as much power as the United States military has, I think it's willingly, if anything. But I don't even think it's willingly. I think they're just making an excuse, and they're going to make it seem like, well, not seem like, they're going to make the excuse, well, the Taliban's still in power, so we have to go back in, or we have to stay there. That's what it feels like to me. Am
Mm-hmm.
I wrong?
No,
I
I
don't think so.
and I'll say this too, they're already propping up that there's some remnants of that government and they're gonna fight and we need to go support them. Like that rhetoric is already happening. And listen, if we tried to form an alternative government for the past 20 years and the second we walk away it collapsed instantly and virtually without bloodshed because people were just like, yep, it's fine. um the we can't there's no winning this war. It's absurd. And the whole thing that's so ridiculous about this too is that we are the reason that the Taliban is in power in the first place. We supported the Mujahideen who became the Taliban,
Mm-hmm.
and we supported them becoming the legitimate government up until two major events. There might be more, but two major events that I know of. One was a pipeline that the Taliban said, no, we're going to own it. It's not going to be owned by some other corporation that isn't here and gets all the money for this pipeline. No thanks. And then they also said, we're going to stop growing poppies. We're going to make that illegal. No more opium.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to war. And suddenly the Taliban are our enemies, a government that we put into power.
What doesn't get included in that is also not too long before September 11th, they discovered the biggest untapped lithium vein in the world in Afghanistan and big untapped gold deposits. Mm-hmm. So you need lithium for batteries for electric cars, and you need gold for circuit boards for everything electronic and computer.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So when it comes to the the Taliban, we don't trust them as far as we can throw them. But if it weren't for the United States doing what it did, I think Afghanistan would probably have been a socialist nation by now, and they probably would have been fairly advanced as far as the way things go.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that, we can have no critical support for the Taliban. We don't have to give them any credit, to understand that, our imperialism has made things worse, that we have whatever timeline, Afghanistan is on to become like a sort of, country with a high standard of democracy, equality, infrastructure, things of that nature. Whatever timeline is only extended by our imperialism, period. And so, yeah, if we had never interfered,
Hmm.
it could have been a completely different country today. Completely different.
Yeah. Yeah.
We went to Afghanistan to win the war on terror, and what we did there was lose the war on drugs.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we actually had a conversation about this, Chris,
Yeah.
when we talked about the history of the drug war.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the biggest legal manufacturer of refined opium in the world is Bayer, who we all think of as aspirin,
Hmm.
and they grow a whole lot of opium in Tasmania legally.
Hmm.
And Afghanistan is a great big supply of opium. It's one of the biggest in the world.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely need to talk about the money that went into Afghanistan, especially if they're going to start trying to keep us there. We really need to talk about it, because all the time we get told, oh, this policy is too expensive, that policy is too expensive. Afghanistan has cost us trillions of dollars.
Hmm.
Including
trillions of dollars.
Including the 21 trillion someone mentioned in the chat that was just lost by the military industrial complex that Lee Camp has talked about several times.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's accounted for it. It's just completely gone.
Yeah. My question is, to, there's a lot of people. I don't even want to. Would it be folly for me to even call them on the left? There's some people who are trying to make excuses for us staying there for security reasons or protecting women, and I'm just like, come on. They know that the United States will do anything it can to keep their troops there or keep military occupation in a country for the sake of um, you know uh, imperialism. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. My brain is just not in it. But yeah. So why are we in the business of believing them when we know that that's all they're there to do? Like, why are some people in your mind, Chris, so willing to give the government a pass when it comes to leaving, well, it comes to staying in, I shouldn't even put air quotes, but when it comes to staying in Afghanistan, why do you think that is?
Because they don't care about other people in other countries. In the simplest way to put it, it's the comfortable white supremacy of liberals who aren't risking anything either way,
Mhm.
and who aren't affected either way. Their life doesn't get better because people leave Afghanistan and they think, oh, somehow it might get worse. So they're like, well, we should stay in Afghanistan. This stuff on the news is scary. And really, that's as far as it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not actively thinking, yeah, I want the U.S. military to kill brown people in Afghanistan. But they don't care about the consequences of what staying there means enough to think it through.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it is the performativeness of liberalism also. A few gestures towards the idea of women's equality as we see it in Western culture is seen as this enshrined thing that we need to protect at all costs. And we're not really talking about an actual liberatory situation. You know, we're not talking about like actually, you know, more meaningfully fixing those problems. We're talking about gestures that feel really good and performative to a Western liberal audience, but that don't necessarily mean that much for the average Afghani woman. We need to talk about that too, you know?
Yes.
And so I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is that they're really interested in these performances that feel good. You know, you want to do everything that looks good on paper. And so on paper, you don't want to be the person who said that women's robotics team in Afghanistan, I guess they're screwed, because that's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, objectively.
Yeah.
Well, that is horrible. You don't. So no one wants to be that person who's saying that. But the liberals will perform that stuff rather than do anything.
And the American lady who's taking a plane back to the States after, even though she was born in Afghanistan and emigrated to escape after the Taliban took over the first time, and then she went back after the U.S. set up another government in the country, and she was teaching at a school, and she had a house near the mountains where she'd always wanted to live. And hearing how she has to go back to the United States and may never be able to come to Afghanistan again, yes, that's sad. On a personal level, I am deeply empathetic for her. But on another level, how arrogant to go back from America and try to make it more like America and make it all about your personal transformation of your home to meet your new American ideas, as opposed to letting the country take its own shape. So it's sad on a personal level, but the whole presence in the first place is emblematic of the imperialist mission to make Afghanistan more acceptable to America.
Yeah. I would say I have to agree with that, because you're trying to Americanize Afghanistan when Afghanistan should still be just Afghanistan, and it should be the way it's supposed to be without any influence of imperialism whatsoever. I want to give some attention to this. He says, "Are we going to keep letting the Roman minions win their war on us with impunity? Will we continue to allow our civilians and military ranks to be intentionally abused?" This is something that actually needs to be talked about. Our troops, the people who go there, and largely they're influenced to go there because they're a lot of times are poor. They don't have health care. They don't have adequate housing. So therefore, they go into the military to get those things, as well as an education. They're being killed left and right as cannon fodder for capitalism. And we have to recognize that a lot of people who are in the military are also victims of imperialism as well.
Oh yeah, and think about it. If you're a person from a certain background joining the military because you were forced in by the poverty draft, so to speak.
Poverty draft, yeah.
Then you're being turned into a killer in order to escape poverty. There's a certain coercion effect. There really isn't any other reliable social safety net. The military and the prison system have become our social safety net. So people either get a job and work until they die, go into the military, or go to prison. Those are their choices in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And people who go into the military as part of that choice are reacting to that sense of coercion to better yourself. And they're being forced to make these horrible personal sacrifices that many of them don't understand when they enlist.
Mm-hmm.
And they only learn the reality of it when they actually end up killing someone.
Yeah.
I do think that, I agree with all this. I do want to say that, I saw one comment said something like our soldiers are the biggest victims of our military. No, the people that we imperialize are still the biggest victims. I wanted to always be clear about that.
Let's never forget that 1 million Iraqis died as opposed to, like a few hundred Americans.
A couple thousand. Yeah, it wasn't that much.
Yeah. I think it should be clarified that U.S. soldiers are a victim. They're not the most disenfranchised of the victims.
Yes.
But that said, I do want to speak to the fact that, coming from severe poverty, watching a lot of my friends go into the military, considering it myself at certain times, it really is worth noting that there is no other real social safety net in this country. But if you join the military, you'll get health care, you'll get, all kinds of benefits, all of these things that are just inaccessible to a lot of people in this country completely. They feel otherwise, and they feel kind of rightly otherwise. And so there is a really intense pressure that is used this way. And this is one of the reasons that the government doesn't want to pass other social services.
And the military is one of the ways the ruling class perpetuates itself, and that they create loyalty within the middle and working class, because people who have been in the military are indoctrinated with a certain view of America. And some people break out of that indoctrination and some don't. And everybody who doesn't is a net win, politically speaking and structurally speaking, for the establishment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it says work stoppages throughout history are the most effective. States that don't counterbalance to capitalism, it's an ally. Counter economics is general strikes, boycotts, task strikes, war strikes.
Not enlisting or fighting. That's how they overthrew the German government at the end of World War I. Is the military, starting with the Navy, stopped fighting. They went on the whole Navy went on strike and wouldn't fight anymore.
I would love to see soldiers do a war strike. I would love to see people.
Now the difference, of course, is that the German Navy and Army were conscripts, the way that we were prior to the draft being pretty much stopped, whereas our military is volunteer. And while there are forced elements in creating those volunteers, mm-hmm. the advantage of a volunteer military is that the soldiers are less likely to stand up to the government, which is not to say that it doesn't happen or that people aren't radicalized in the military. It does, and they are. But it's very important to understand that in a volunteer military, it's much harder and much more unrealistic to expect the military to go on strike against fighting a war. It would be wonderful if it were possible, but it's much more difficult when you're talking about a volunteer military that to some degree agreed to go fight that war.
Mm-hmm. Kevin Tui, our government has proven it would rather give you a disability check than provide a government job for you. That's kind of tough, but they would rather you lose a few limbs than actually, like, for instance, wouldn't it be best to use our Army Corps of Engineers to actually put in green tech throughout the country? Instead of picking up, guns, instead they pick up, shovels and hammers and
Yeah.
use them to build. I mean, the only war I think we should be fighting is the war against climate change. And you can't fight climate change with a gun, but you can definitely do it with a hammer, you know?
Horses and plows.
I think
Yeah.
there's always this disconnect. I think anybody in this country can look around their community and see an obvious disconnect where you can see things like roads that aren't getting fixed, infrastructure that's not getting updated in your town, etc. And there seems to be no job associated with fixing that. Isn't that interesting?
hmm Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy because a lot of times, if we started pushing more for green technology and, um, green jobs, things like that, and we started moving away from fossil fuels, then that would give us no reason to have these wars in other countries over resources. Because if we're making alternative resources here at home without having to go abroad, no need for war, no need for us to, risk lives of young people to go out and fight for billionaires. I mean, that's just it just makes so much more sense. And for some reason, for the life of me, oh, you know what? I know the answer. Propaganda. That's the reason why people are so willing to go abroad, because they're always taught that there's this American exceptionalism, that anything we do is pure and good, and even if we do something bad, well, it's justified.
Even in anti-war movies, Americans are still the good guys in a lot of ways. Even in a lot of popular culture that isn't necessarily about war, you have things like a CIA agent as a good guy in the Black Panther. When is a CIA agent ever a good guy in Africa?
Oh my God.
And when in the history of Africa has a CIA agent ever been the good guy?
And there's also this aspect of exceptionalism that is like cultural and technological and all these things that are wrapped up in that too, where we believe that, we don't necessarily have things perfect in America, but it's pretty close and it's the best it could be. And so we need to go export that. And we don't need to change anything here. That's part of this whole imperialism thing too. The imperialist project helps to emphasize the idea that we don't need to change things here.
But Kennedy, I thought the goal was to form a more perfect union.
A more perfect union with deep protection of minority rights. Now, who is the minority in this country from a class perspective?
That would be the billionaires.
Yes. Now, let's remember. So at the time that we're enshrining minority rights in the Constitution, you have the state of South Carolina, which had more slaves than white people. Likewise, the state of Georgia, which had more slaves than white people. You had the state of Virginia, where only property owners could vote. Likewise, Massachusetts, where only property owners could vote. So when you talk about protecting the minority, you're talking about protecting the richest, 10% of the population from everybody else.
Hold on. Robin Ryan, really? This is...
Yes, Bannon was in Hollywood for a long time.
I knew that he because in one of my videos, I was talking to somebody that he was establishing the base for the right-wing type of thought that you see, especially on, online gaming community. But this is something that's interesting I haven't heard, but it makes some sense.
Well, he worked in Hollywood before he went into politics. He was a Hollywood person with weird political ideas who stopped getting work in Hollywood because he was too weird politically. And his work drying up in Hollywood is what pushed him into alternative media and the alt-right and Breitbart and a bunch of other stuff.
I thought it was just because he was a jerk, but okay.
Well, that too.
Yeah, that too.
Being a jerk is one of the reasons he was pushed out of Hollywood.
You can have pretty weird politics in Hollywood if you're quiet enough about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, they will let you be a Nazi in Hollywood until you make noise. And even then, you know, they've tolerated Mel Gibson more than they've really wanted to because he makes money for people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great Goblin, I want to thank you for this. It says whistleblowers, soldiers like Daniel Hale and Chelsea Manning made this convo possible.
Yes.
Daniel Hale, Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, you know, people like them. Reality Winner. I want to make sure I give her flowers too.
John Kiriakou.
Yeah. Every single one of those whistleblowers are heroes that honestly should have gotten the Medal of Honor. They should have. Instead, they get jail time, prison time, which I think is a travesty. I mean, Julian Assange, for somebody who is not American, he should get the highest honor for what he did in journalism, for letting us know what our government was doing behind our backs in our name. And I think that's something that is, I hope that if we don't do it while he's alive, you know, maybe decades down the line, we can do it posthumously, but he needs to be recognized for the heroic work that that all of them have been doing. They need to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that needs to be recognized regardless of what someone thinks of Assange as a person or what they think about his connections in Australian politics.
Yeah. Because I mean, he did a good thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Even if it turned out that, which I honestly think is possible, that some terrible charges against Julian Assange are true in terms of like sexual assault type stuff.
Well,
and he went to jail for that. That wouldn't invalidate the political work. And this is a common tactic. I mean, think about the way people talk about, you know, Martin Luther King.
Exactly.
You know, like this is a common tactic that has been used to poison the well over and over again when it comes to like, you know, someone speaking out about leftist stuff, and then it's like, oh, but they were a bad person in some regard. It doesn't matter if they're a bad person personally, if the information that they released is accurate. If the information that Julian Assange has released about the secret dealings of our country is accurate, and I believe that most of what I've seen is, then that's still relevant.
Yep. And, you know, even if he deliberately, let's say that Julian Assange is deliberately a Russian spy who deliberately tanked the election to help Trump. If everything that he did is true, who the fuck cares?
Look,
we still need to talk about the fact that we wouldn't know about a lot of this stuff in Afghanistan that we're talking about right now at all.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, look, the whole thing of another Assange smears that he was also sabotaged Hillary Clinton's campaign for revenge. Some people may say that Julian Assange sabotaged Hillary Clinton. He saved us from a warmonger. Some people may say it that way.
Some people have said it that way. Whether they're right or wrong, that's an independent judgment for people to make.
I mean, they're both warmongers. So, I mean, either way, we were screwed.
They're all warmongers.
We were screwed either way with Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump.
Is the worst choice ever.
Yeah. It's like, do you want hemorrhoids or it's like, you know, asking a question.
Well, no.
You know, would you rather drown or burn to death?
The big question, the big thing about the Republicans and the Democrats is always, would you rather get stabbed in the front or the back?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question.
Honestly, I don't even know anymore. Which one's
actually, I hate that question.
Stabbing you in the front or the back?
Well, in theory, the Republicans are telling you, hey, I'm stabbing you. I'm coming right at you and stabbing you right now. which means you expect the Republicans to stab you, and you immediately start thinking about how you can defend yourself from the Republicans who are going to stab you.
Yeah.
So, in this
saying,
sense,
these
there's
days,
an
the Democrats-
advantage.
When Jill Biden said, "Doesn't the air smell nicer without a mask on?" She was stabbing us right in the front that time.
That's true. No, that's true.
Yeah.
But you think about that, though. That came at the end of all this: wear your mask, wear your mask, wear your mask. So it's this blatant pandering to the Republicans, which is that stab in the back again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
which takes us back to our compromising, our talk about policy concessions and things like that. Democrats make totally unnecessary policy concessions to Republicans, largely because they agree with Republicans.
Well, that's how we got into some of this Afghanistan stuff too, right? When I was a child, the Democrats were an anti-war party. Not like
allegedly
entirely, but there was definitely like it was acceptable to be a mainstream Democrat and say, I'm against war. We don't need to be going to war, and to do all that stuff. And then all of that changed. And now the Democrats are as hawkish as anyone. There's no question that, the Democrats are going to drop bombs, same as anybody else. And that's concessions to these more conservative standards. And why? It's always about money.
Well, let's talk about the Democrats' anti-war record, because history is fun.
Oh, and it is a messy thing. I'm not trying to make
No, I know. History is fun. History is very fun. Because the Mexican War, where the United States deliberately invaded its neighbor to steal territory, and there was absolutely no other reason to go to war than to deliberately steal territory from Mexico. That was a Democratic Party project from start to finish. The opposition party, the Whigs, stopped being an effective political party because they had the balls to oppose the Mexican War. And then, of course, the Democrats were in office for both world wars. But what people don't remember is that the reason that Woodrow Wilson worked so hard to keep us out of World War II was because he was busy conquering Central America for Chiquita Banana. We were fighting what they call the Banana Wars for the entire first term of Woodrow Wilson's presidency. Nobody in your history class tells you about the American army invading Nicaragua and Panama and Guatemala in those days.
Thanks to Revolutionary Jargon, RJ
Yes.
said F James K. Polk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said he was the president that led the Western expansion.
Yes.
Yep.
The Mexican War.
Yeah. I just and I'm not trying to make a joke, but I actually kind of want to just go into my kitchen right now and throw those bananas out. I really do. Because
I get it.
Yeah.
And it's like whenever I want bananas, Chiquita, they're the only ones that are available that you see. It's like they have a monopoly on bananas.
Well, I mean, they almost do. I mean, there are other brands, but for a long, long time, the sugar that you see most often is C&H. The imperialism is right there on the box. C&H sugar, Cuba and Hawaii. Two places that were literally conquered by the U.S. military. One in the Spanish-American War and one in...
Shit. Now I got to look up the word allegory and see what it means. God damn it.
It's time to, have a little grammar lesson in our day.
Yep, it's gonna have to get a little glamour gory as far as the interpretive reveal hidden meaning. Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I was just like, man, I gotta look up what this word means. I had to do that with CJ too, because he said a word. I forgot what it was, but I was like, man, I gotta look up this word and see exactly what it meant. So, see, I always learn something new. Let me see.
But yeah, and so then Vietnam started under JFK and Lyndon Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Korea started under Truman.
Mm-hmm.
Eisenhower, the closest thing to an anti-war president we ever had, except that he loved the CIA, and the CIA was run by white supremacists at the time. Literal white supremacists. Alan Welsh Dulles said that the goal of the CIA was to maintain white supremacy through capitalism.
Yeah.
Because how did we get here? How did my ancestors get here? From capitalism.
Yeah, but with all that aside, Eisenhower was the closest thing to an anti-war president we ever had. He was elected on ending the Korean War, and he actually kept the promise.
Mm-hmm.
And did not bring troops home, but stopped them from killing people and getting killed. Sadly, we've still got troops there because imperialism.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But he did end the active fighting.
Yeah, I still say this. I don't care what anybody says. The Korean War never ended.
Yeah,
it's still going on. It's just troops aren't fighting.
It's officially North and South Korea are still at war. They very much want to have peace conference, and the United States basically stops them.
Yeah, and
the Secretary of State was Alan's brother, John Foster Dulles.
Got it.
Even Trump, people talked up, oh, Trump's making friends with North Korea. No, he was doing the same thing that we've always done, which is the minute that North and South Korea make any motions to talk to each other, we step in and we say, hey, we don't want this getting out of control, getting heated. Let us talk to both sides first. We'll see what's up. And then somehow, oh no, this fell apart. I'm sure it wasn't us being bad faith.
In the first Seoul Olympics, back in like 1988 was Seoul, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That first Seoul Olympics, Kim Jong-un's father and the then president of South Korea had all these record meetings and summits and had this great moment together in front of the world. And then the United States came in and started immediately putting hard pressure on North Korea over their nuclear program that ruined all the peace talks between North and South Korea. Does that sound familiar to anyone?
Mm-hmm. Still going on to this day.
That's exactly what Trump did. Trump did exactly what Bill Clinton did.
Yep. And if you go poll the people in the North or the South, a great majority still want reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
People have families on both sides of the line still.
Yeah, this is the desire of the people who live there. They want this to come to some kind of reconciliation. We don't. The United States does not.
Let's all remember that the reason that the Korean War happened in the first place, and the reason the Vietnam War happened, which I'm going to get to in a moment, but the reason the Korean War happened in the first place was because if we had kept our agreement with the Koreans and the British and the French and the Russians to have a national Korean election, the Democratic Party of Korea, the communists, would have won. And if the Democratic Party of Korea had won the election, we would have had one communist Korea, and all the American troops would have had to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you
love to ignore that.
Same in Vietnam, same in Afghanistan. Literally, there has been talk.
What most people don't know
mm-hmm.
is that in Yemen, in the 1970s, when the British left, The British left Yemen in 2 countries, one essentially controlled by the British and the other communist.
Wow.
And this has happened all over the world, where people preempt elections because they're worried communists will win, or they're worried in the more modern era where we overthrew the elected government of Egypt and put the awful Sisi back in charge. Someone even worse than the dictator that the Arab Spring had overthrown.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were scared of radical Islamists taking over the government because of the election. So we put a dictator back in there. We're scared of democracy because people we don't like will win elections because the United States is hated in these countries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that literally we have talked about splitting Afghanistan in this same way.
Yes.
This is a ongoing theme.
But look at Iraq. Iraq is, even though Iraq is one country, there are autonomous zones within Iraq that keep the country from being completely united.
Mm-hmm.
There's been talks of a 3-state solution for Iraq.
Yes.
Just so that we could have our capitalist interests still condensed into the areas that we care about most, which is the same thing in Korea,
in Syria. The only reason the CIA was helping Kurdish anarchists in Syria was not because of their great desire to support Kurdish anarchists. The CIA was supporting Kurdish anarchists in Syria because the Kurdish anarchists were a third force that divided the country that much more.
Mm-hmm. And now, to be clear, if some of these countries wanted to collapse because they don't like these borders that were drawn by the British for them,
or the French in the case of Syria.
But in the case of Afghanistan, the British.
Yes.
Well,
actually, that's funny because the Afghans actually threw the British out. The real problem is that there has never been any strong Afghan state.
Mm-hmm.
Except there have been 2 Afghan states that have had any sort of power outside Kabul itself, ever. And that was the communists and the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And that was both because they had something for everybody in the country to believe in, whether it was communism or religion. It was it was something that united people in all the different corners of the country.
Okay. Just looking at the chat is definitely very engaging.
I think that there's a real possibility. I want to address that comment. Just say I think there's a real possibility. James, you were kind of saying this earlier too, of Afghanistan moving very far left if given the opportunity. But it has to be given the room to breathe. We have to get our troops out. We have to not hit them with trade sanctions so ferocious that they can't function as a country. We have to do things differently to allow them to have that space. Otherwise, again, we're just delaying the inevitability that one day Afghanistan could be an amazing, really different country than we think of now. But we are the thing preventing that.
So let's not forget that once Afghanistan was, for a very short time, a very different country than the one we think of now.
Yeah.
It was when the communists were there.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S. ruined that by funding the very people who eventually set up the Taliban.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like what Deep Moody Purple Blues says, funny how we rarely ever hear from people on the ground in these countries as to what they want, and unless they are a military industrial complex plant.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what do the Afghan people want? Because we keep talking about what we want or what we want to see, but it's like, what do they want to see? And not the ones who are sympathetic to the military industrial complex. What do the actual people of Afghanistan want? Especially the people who were around not too many of them are around, unfortunately, because of the military forces. But the older ones who are around, during the 1970s, who saw that, they were pushing towards, women's equality, and that they were having a more left-wing government. What do they want? And I bet you the military industrial complex does not want to hear what they have to say, because if they hear what they have to say, it's going to sound very left wing, and they're going to sound probably a lot like us.
Well,
Yeah. Well, over and over again in Afghanistan, in Iran, we have toppled these left-wing governments, these progressive governments, and then put in a right-wing dictatorship, and then said, hey, look at this evil right-wing dictatorship. We have to go fight it.
yeah.
Like, what is that? What even? It's so evil. It's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's always there when we need a distraction from someplace else.